Hello, everybody. Welcome to the DePIN podcast. I'm your host, Tom Trowbridge. We're excited to bring you interviews with the key founders in the DePIN landscape, investors, and ecosystem partners. This is an exciting time for DePIN, and this year we're going to be meeting even more founders learning about the projects that they're building, about the traction they're getting, and about the revenue that they're generating. The podcast is brought to you by Fluence. Fluence is building a decentralized compute platform. It's a project I'm a co-founder of and really excited about. So buckle up for this year. Please subscribe to the channel, listen to us on Spotify or Apple. And of course, if you are around any of the large conferences, come to our DePIN Day, where you can meet these founders on the Fluence team in person and hear from all the ecosystem partners as well. So look forward to seeing you in person, and let's get going on this podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the DePIN podcast. I'm your host, Tom Trowbridge, coming to you from Denver. Right around ETH Denver. We just hosted a DePIN Day yesterday and thrilled to be following up with a couple of podcasts we're doing with some of our guests at that DePIN Day. And so I'm happy here to be with Ayush, co-founder of Huddle01. Welcome, Ayush.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me.
Listen, we're thrilled to have you. You can tell Ayush is a DePIN Day veteran with the sweatshirt he's got on. I think he's a 4-Pete, but he's yet to be on the podcast. So thrilled to have you on the podcast so that we can cover you in even more detail than what you've been able to talk about in your keynote. So thanks for coming into the studio.
Thanks, Tom. DePIN Day is one of the flagship events of every conference which I go to, so won't miss it for the world.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for your participation and sponsorship. Let's dig into Huddle01 first. So talk about what I believe it's real-time kind of decentralized connectivity. So tell us what that means and quickly how it works.
Absolutely. So Huddle01 is a real-time communication network. That's how we envisioned it earlier. And over time, it became into a decentralized connectivity network, which means that anything which requires low latency and high bandwidth could be powered by Huddle01. We took an approach of, it was not called DePIN back in the day when we started. It was 4 years back in a hackathon project. It was ETH Global Hackfest, where I and Sushmit, my co-founder, we essentially wanted to build a better product as compared to Zoom, because Zoom was not working at all in Indian parts of the world where the bandwidth was super low. So all the calls were routed through a central server in North Virginia, and the call quality was not good at all. And people had to use Zoom in tandem with WhatsApp to essentially have these kind of calls. And that's where we realized that the problem was not with Zoom, the problem was with the underlying infrastructure of how low latency should be done. And that's how we created this network and built our own apps first on that network, took a demand-first approach. And then as soon as the network became live, we realized that it's not just for communication, it could be for anything low latency. Wherever you require low latency and high bandwidth could be those developers or people can use that network.
Really interesting. And so how then help us understand is it the software layer that makes it work better? Is it the contribution of people's bandwidth? Like what is the kind of the core piece of it which makes it so efficient?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of bandwidth, what we have realized when we started building Huddle01 back in the day was, right now, everything is dependent on hyperscalers, and AWS, GCP, and Azure are in particular parts of the world. They're not everywhere. And they're majorly in essentially western part of the world where there are more data centers. So when you do any kind of real-time connectivity kind of things, it's pretty easy to have a good experience when you're in the west part of the world. But as soon as you flip that script and go towards the east, you realize that latency is a big problem. And you essentially face problem in terms of doing kind of calls, even in terms of doing any kind of financial activities where you require faster order mapping and stuff like that. So the problem is that we need to make sure that we don't depend on hyperscalers anymore for bandwidth related tasks. And you can have your own essentially bandwidth by having these bandwidths on the edges rather than having on just the clouds, which is now possible because of 5G and because of 6G coming up, that now people have good amount of bandwidth and a decent amount of compute on their own laptop or essentially on their own Raspberry Pi, which they can run very easily via their home itself. And that's what we have been focusing towards, making sure that these nodes could be run on the edges and they can power these calls and any kind of thing which happens.
Well, I want to get into how the nodes work in detail, but let's back up and talk about your background and what took you to Huddle01.
Yeah, my background is I'm an electrical engineer by my studies. I graduated back in 2016. did a lot of work with electronics equipments in general, but over time realized that I really loved startups. I really loved working at a lot of building products from ground up, 0 to 1. And that's where I did a lot of work in the startup world. And then I read a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman back in 2018. And that's where behavioral economics became my like a very lovable subject to me. And I used to always see when I was reading these books on by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, I was seeing a lot of footnotes which talked about a white paper of Bitcoin. And that's where my journey into started in the space of, okay, what is this essentially Bitcoin? And I realized that Bitcoin is a culmination of subject which I adored, which was behavioral economics, a bit of mechanism design, a bit of game theory, and it would be productized in the form of blockchain itself. So my earlier idea was that I would go and do a master's in behavioral economics and mechanism design and maybe do a PhD and essentially do something like what Daniel Kahneman did for the world. But over time, I realized that I love building products. So essentially, if I can do that same thing in the blockchain space, I think that will be of a much bigger impact than going into the academics line and doing that. So that has been, and then it was peak COVID. ETH Global used to do a lot of hackathons, and that's where I realized that let's just participate. It was a 30-day hackathon, and that's where we stuck with this. We saw this big problem because it was happening a lot in India that people and Zoom stock was over the roof at that time. It was at $450. $450 all the way, like it was a black swan event which happened, and that really helped Zoom. It was an enterprise grade software, not really meant for the public in that sense. It was really for the, not for the masses, but for the industries, but really penetrated everywhere. But it had this big problem, and I used to see that with my cousins who were like in third grade or fourth grade, and they had to do rote learning for 2 years straight. Like 2020 to 2022, they had a rote learning experience because the latency was so high. They used to just ask their friends on WhatsApp that, hey, what did the teacher just say? Because I was not able to hear that. And that's where this whole idea came into picture, that why not make communication much more people powered and move into the world. And that's where this whole blockchain journey kick-started for us.
Really interesting. Well, that's a good transition into it. So help understand the scale, how people contribute to the network, and kind of the DePIN aspect of it all.
Absolutely. So right now we started, like, it was not called DePIN back in the day. Our whole idea was to build a people-powered network, a network which is very similar to Airbnb, and just like how Airbnb did for a shared economy space, do that for the shared bandwidth space. But when we kickstarted, we were sitting on the shoulder of the giants, including Filecoin and LivePeer, and they were the ones who really backed us back in the day when we kickstarted our journey of building Huddle01. And that's where I realized that building the supply side definitely is hard, but even the harder part is building the demand side yourself. And that's where we built the Huddle01 Meet app in a completely peer-to-peer fashion, where now you don't require central servers anymore. You don't even require a centralized signaling server. And if I and Tom are doing a call, your laptop can become a node and can power the call. And by doing so, we realized that the latency reduced from 300 milliseconds to 50 milliseconds in particular parts of India, where it was huge, like because 300 milliseconds is where the calls doesn't feel real time. From your ears to essentially when you speak, it should be less than 100 milliseconds. If not, it doesn't feel real time. And that's when we built this product out. It got a lot of traction, not only in the world of Web3, but also in the world of Web2, where all these tech startups, educational tech startups, started using it for the sake that it has a better quality. It is much it has much lower latency as compared to the other centralized softwares out there. And then we opened up that network slowly to the public, where now public who had 4-core CPUs, had a 250 Mbps internet connection, can become a node and can power these calls. Earlier, we used to do it ourselves internally inside the whole. It was kind of progressive decentralization, where we first used to run these nodes ourselves in different parts of the world, and then we started giving out to public. And now we have more than 2,500 nodes, which we have distributed all across the world. And we did that in the form of a one-time node cost. And the reason for that was to also filter like farmers from the actual node operators who are really serious about it. And it turned out pretty well. Now we have more than 150,000 Mbps of bandwidth already sitting on the network, and these are really high quality. And it's being used for things beyond communication as well.
So you did effectively a node sale, and you sold how many nodes?
We sold 2,500 nodes.
2,500 nodes, and that has good distribution around the world. I'm guessing it's a lot in India, and a lot in emerging markets where it's most useful, but probably around the world. And then what do those nodes, how do they earn from those nodes?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, per day, you are earning 5 testnet Huddle tokens, T Huddle, because the token is not live in the market yet. And you're earning T Huddle, 5 Huddle, T Huddle tokens per day. And then in the mainnet, it will happen for the next 6 months. And then in the mainnet, you will be earning based on how much kind of demand you have, how much demand is routed through your essentially node operators. So if you're in India, if there is a call happening in India and your node is located in Mumbai, so you'll be located to the Mumbai-based nodes. Right now, we have 20% nodes in essentially India, and rest 80% is located all across the globe. So, and we have this business logic where or the orchestration logic where we see where the calls are happening, and based on that, we route to the lowest where the latency could be even less than 80 milliseconds and 70 milliseconds.
And so is this a app on a phone that you use to call? So you could download Huddle01 as an app, and then that connects your phone via Wi-Fi, I'm guessing, or via cellular data, and then hits into the internet based on wherever the providers are, and the processing is done by these decentralized nodes.
That's right. You got it completely. We have Huddle01 Meet as one of the apps. There are multiple apps like this on the network which we have built ourselves. Huddle01 Meet is very similar to what Zoom or what Google Meet is. We also have an app called Farhouse, which is very similar to X Spaces, where you now can do decentralized audio spaces and stuff like that. The whole idea for building apps first was to basically show to the developers that how easy it is to build an app using our own infrastructure already. So we have our own SDKs live. It's already powering a lot of apps on Lens protocol, apps on Farcast, and a lot of these social graphs which requires audio and video on a day-to-day basis. And by doing so, we have generated a demand of 8 million minutes of meeting. So now even beyond testnet, when the supply side essentially gets that incentive system, you actually have demand which will be catering towards you based on your wherever your location is, and it will be powered by the way which you mentioned.
And so there's a B2C side, also B2B, right? Because it sounds like you're almost private labeling, or you're behind the scenes for some of these other applications. Presumably they pay you. How's that revenue enter the network, and how is that kind of linked or manifest in the token design?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two business models. First of all is B2C. B2C is very simply this, like you pay for Zoom subscription, you pay for Huddle01 Meet subscription. If you have more than 100 people on call, that's you start paying. There's a business license. Right now, essentially, we're talking to a couple of players. Arbitrum DAO is one of them, who essentially, let's suppose we're using Zoom, will now switch from Zoom to using Huddle01. Essentially, every organization which requires a white labeled solution, they will get their own logo, Fluence, and essentially Fluence.huddle01.com, which will be token gated. You can live stream on multiple places in one click, and that means on X, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, in one click. So you get a combination of Zoom and StreamYard clubbed into one as an app, and you can use it pretty well. That's for $49. That's first.
$49 per month.
$49 per month. Yes, where you get both Zoom and StreamYard kind of subscription. That will cost you around $100 if you take both these SaaS licenses. That's first. And the second is for the developers, which is B2B, where any developer on Farcaster or on Lens who wants to build using Huddle01, they pay $1 for every 1,000 minutes for the audio API, and $4 for every 1,000 minutes for the video API, which is 50% cheaper than, for example, Agora, which is a Web2 based CPaaS solution. And that's how and whatever revenue comes follows a BME model, a abandonment model, where any revenue which comes into the system gets basically completely burnt and will be used for essentially burning the whole tokens which is there in the overall DG supply.
So 100% of revenue will buy and burn token. That's terrific. I'm a huge fan of that. I say regularly that anything less than 100% introduces a divergence of interest between the team and the token holders, and you want full alignment. So if you have 100% buy burn, and I don't see very many like that. I think Glow does that. You may be one of the only other projects that does it. A lot are GeoNet's at 80%, and if many are lower than that. But I think that is a terrific setup, and I think that ultimately you then become the demand for your token, and people see your project being successful, projecting revenue, and that just, you don't need anyone else to find out about the token because you are the buyer and the burner of that token. So it should be a pretty compelling thing.
Absolutely. We always wanted to keep it near to 100 at all cents, because the whole logic was that's the way where your token can accrue value, as much value as possible. So yes, our tokenomics is still in the works completely. Our mainnet is still not there, but the good thing is that we have made sure that the demand is already there. That's something which we always feared about, that which essentially happens with a lot of protocols in the DePIN sector, and you'll see that it follows a bell curve even in terms of price chart. And the reason behind that is there's a supply shock which happens after.
When tokens start vesting and releasing. Exactly.
And that's something which you need to avoid. I think, which you mentioned about Zero.net, they did it decently well, where now you have this 80% buyback, and that makes sure that the token price doesn't follow that bell curve. I hope that it keeps on going like that, but that's a very good way of thinking about tokenomics in general.
And here's the other thing I think is important that we haven't yet had to worry about in DePIN, but it's coming, which is revenue verification. Because anyone in our space can say they have any amount of revenue, right? There's no audit. There's no push on who the customers are. People want to be secret by nature in the space, right? But what's clear? Well, here's how many tokens were burned and bought, and here's the price. And if that's on chain, there is no doubt about that. That's more verifiable than the best auditor in the world, right? And so to me, that buy burn is critical because it provides irrefutable evidence that the revenue numbers you are claiming are in fact accurate and received. And I think that is going to also, presumably, that will also deserve a premium as well because of the trust that involves. And I think that will be more important, especially when I think some of the revenue numbers that are thrown around out there are kind of never really substantiated.
Yeah, because there's no way to verify it. Like right now, I'm seeing some absurd numbers in Generalize, though. And very interestingly, like demand side revenue versus supply side revenue is also one of the bigger topics which is already discussed in DePIN, that there's a supply side revenue, which essentially means that people are using your network, but technically you're not paying for that network. It's just that you are burning those from your side. So also those kind of numbers is something which on token terminal is always is something which comes into picture, and it always changes a lot. It fluctuates a lot, but this revenue verification will be a pretty gold standard to solve this.
Yeah, and I think that is what buy burn is starting to do, and I think that's ultimately, I think in DePIN, going to be required effectively to be credible. We're not there yet, but it's an early space. But if projects like yours, Geo, others do this, I think it'll really set the standard. So very excited about that. The other thing I'm excited about in your project is that we announced this DePIN pledge at DePIN Day, and we had a bunch of people signing up. But when people think about a DePIN pledge, and just for people that don't know, that is basically a way for companies using DePIN to get the credit for decentralize some of their infrastructure. And so people think about infrastructure and they think about compute, they think about storage, but it's not limited to that. And so I think any company that's a customer of yours could easily take the DePIN pledge because they've just decentralized the telephony part of their infrastructure away from a Zoom or whatever. And so I think every one of your customers needs to sign the DePIN pledge because they're already in it, right? And so I think that is a terrific kind of, let me phrase it, almost a much easier way to make a step into DePIN to do this telephony versus move all your compute onto DePIN, right? And that's also what I'm excited for. And you highlighted these numbers in your presentation. The amount of minutes you're using and the amount of people on it is real evidence of product market fit and of DePIN scaling, which is terrific. Why don't you talk a little bit about kind of the scale of where you are right now and where you think you could go?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm very excited about DePIN Pledge. We also talked to the team about it. I think we'd love to be a part of it. A lot of our customers, they are even behind the scenes. They're not even Web3, they're like Web2. And these all people are playing such a key role in making the infrastructure decentralized and using it and walking the talk. Regarding Huddle01, in terms of our platform, we have reached 8 million minutes of meeting via multiple apps which we have. Huddle01 Meet is the biggest one. It's being used by a lot of organizations right now in Web3 space and in Web2 space for a variety of reasons. The first biggest reason is that you look better. On rather than Zoom, you look better. It's browser based. You get a 1080 video quality, and you're able to live stream that call onto 10 places in one click. It's not possible via Zoom or Google Meet right now. None of the platforms in the video conferencing world have the capability of doing live stream from one place, one to many, in 10 places at one click. You need a OBS
That's
or you
pretty
need
cool.
a StreamYard
That's pretty
to do
cool.
that. And that's how we created this wedge and kind of a way why people started using Huddle01, because hey, I get a better distribution if I use Huddle01 Meet platform. That's one. The second one is Farhouse, which is one of the apps that we have built, which is on Farcaster, where Farcaster was really good for async communication, but they didn't have any kind of audio video communications. So for example, if they wanted to, the community wanted to chat, there was no way to chat. They had to go on X Spaces to essentially have this audio conferencing or audio meetings. And that's where we built this, and that really blew up. We got a good revenue of $60,000 coming from that because people wanted to do tipping there, microtransactions, and new kind of way of helping creators and stuff. So that was second. And then third was indirect network effects via the SDKs into different social graphs, into different edtech and healthcare based companies as well, who wanted to add audio video in their own apps. They really loved building their own products, but they didn't know how to add audio and video in their own apps by themselves. And that's where this plug and play SDK really helped them. The combination of these three, the Huddle01 Meet app, the Farhouse, and the SDKs, made us reach 8 million minutes of meetings so far. We grow at a healthy rate of 40% month over month.
That's pretty healthy.
Yes. So that's really helping us so far. And the good thing is that we are already integrated into Google Calendar. So you can just go onto a G Suite and you can just add Huddle01 there, and you don't need to do anything. You can use cal.com instead of Calendly. And in cal.com, you can add Huddle01 as a default. So if you're sending a scheduler link, you get Huddle01 as a default. If you're sending a Google Calendar link, you're getting Huddle01 as a default. So we already are capturing that network effects. And if more and more people in Web3 also start using it, I think we'll reach a very good escape velocity very fast.
Pretty interesting. So help us understand, 8 million minutes is a lot, but that is, doesn't move the needle in terms of the global telephony minutes, right? So help us understand where you think you can go. Growing 40% a month is obviously terrific growth. Where you think that is in terms of minutes, in terms of dollars, what paint the sort of blue sky picture of where you think this goes with the products you have?
Yeah. So if just giving in as a total addressable market in general, the calls which Google Meet does daily is 300 million meetings, which happens daily.
300 million meetings,
yes,
which is way more minutes because there's multiple.
Absolutely. So multiply that with 4 because that's an average which happens on a call. So that's the amount of meeting, which is 1.2, 1.5 billion minutes of meeting, which happens every day.
Every day.
Yes. And we have reached 8 million minutes total.
Wow.
So the market is huge. Like if you are able to crack that, it's a really big market. So we have been able to scratch the surface because of our space, Web3. But if you go beyond this, sky is the limit in terms of where you can reach. And once that happens, the amount of egress cost which AWS charges right now for doing these calls to, now Google has its own GCP, but Zoom doesn't have their own GCP. They don't have their own hyperscalers, and they get crushed on egress costings right now. So our competition not with Zoom, our whole idea is to get Zoom to use the DRTC network of Huddle01 that don't pay that amount of egress cost to these hyperscalers. You can essentially use this decentralized network where you will get better latency, but you will be paying much lesser costing as well. And that's the reason why Zoom charges $20 to us every month. The reason is that they have to pay a huge amount of money in terms of egress cost, which you'll even find in their financial statements on how much money goes to the hyperscalers. So that's how we see the whole picture. If the demand keeps on increasing, and if we have a very good incentive mechanism where the buyback or essentially where the burn is good enough, everybody in the node operator, everyone who's running the nodes will eat very well.
No doubt. But I'm guessing if you have that number, I think we said 1,400 nodes?
2,500 nodes.
2,500 nodes.
Yeah.
But that supports, plenty, but it supports way more than what you have now. But presumably if you start to scale, you're going to need a lot more nodes, right?
Sure.
Which means you have to do another node sale, needs more, which means you have to emit more. So things start to change. But it sounds like the other interesting thing is I can't just go buy a node right now. It's up to you to sort of provision it to do another sale, so you can scale the nodes as demand grows as well, which means you're effectively scaling emissions as demand grows as well, which is also important.
Absolutely. So we could have kept this node sales going in perpetuity. Like it could have been just, but here's the point. If you would have sold like 50,000 nodes, it would again have been the same chicken and egg problem.
Yeah, and you would then be emitting more tokens, and you have demand to burn, and it would not have been a productive network. I mean, Fluence, same thing, where we had a demand for, thousands of CPUs to join our network. We're scaling, but we pay rewards, and so we're only scaling CPUs as we have revenue join the network. So I think the days of the market rewarding a massive demonstration of supply are over, right? People now reward revenue. And I think that's for sure in DePIN, right? And so that's what you're obviously, focused on and doing. But that is to phrase it differently. How many to wherever you think you go, I don't know what that number is, whether you calculate by minutes, by revenue, but wherever you think you are in your optimistic case in 3 years, whatever it is, 5 years, does that mean you have 10x the number of nodes you have to operate? Is it 20x? Is it like, how does that, growing at 40% a month for years is a huge number? Help me understand how many nodes you think required for that.
So interestingly, we did an exercise back in the day where we saw that how many nodes does it need for Zoom to completely transition on the network of Huddle01, and we reached a number of precisely 46,900. So that's the amount of nodes you need to completely have Zoom to run on top of your network.
And how many minutes do you think that is?
That's on an average 2 billion minutes every day.
Billion minutes every day. And I can't do that math in my head. What would that revenue be for you for Huddle01?
So essentially, right now, if I talk about Zoom's revenue, Zoom is doing, I don't have that number on top of my head. It will be somewhere near, in totality, every year in terms of ARR would be somewhere near $180 to $200 million.
And that's at your pricing.
That's
or you're pricing 50% of that.
Yeah, we are pricing lower than that. This is Zoom's pricing.
But fine. So that's, if you get Zoom on the network and they're a client of Huddle01, that would be roughly between $80 and $100 million of revenue.
This is what I
back in the envelope.
Yeah, back in the envelope.
Fine.
Yeah,
but that's $100 million, pick a round number, $100 million worth of burn every year for achieving one, but obviously the largest potential client. That's interesting. Obviously, that's interesting. And Zoom has every interest in doing it because it lowers their costs.
That makes the cost 50% cheaper. They don't have to pay 50%. They have been paying a huge amount of money to AWS, and that completely goes away.
That's certainly compelling. Then we get Zoom to sign the DePIN pledge.
Absolutely. Actually, Zoom, Agora, and a couple of other players who are Twilio, they're all fed up with hyperscalers. They're trying to create their own hyperscalers, but you know that how difficult it is to create your own hyperscaler once you are not thinking about in terms of decentralization, but in terms of just making sure that it's distributed. So Agora is trying to create a distributed system, but it's not decentralized. That means they're trying to do everything themselves, and that cannot scale to the way decentralized systems can scale.
What did the nodes cost? Did you sell them for?
$320, $300.
$300.
Yes.
Fine. And so that, by saving that, it just makes your business incredibly capital efficient because you're not spending the $300 per fourth, whatever, be $5,000 for the Zoom level, whatever it is. Growth and scale makes things different. Things break with scale. So is there significant development required to be confident that you can achieve even, a quarter or tenth of the numbers you're talking about? Because presumably, for people not in tech, it seems sort of easy. You demonstrate the product, it works, scales, the easy thing, but we know that's not the case. So presumably there's additional development required to be confident and to support that level of scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So doing load balancing at this level is insanely difficult task. The good thing is that we have been building in WebRTC space for 5 years now. So we have seen a lot of things very closely on things which breaks, on how can you, and that's why we chose the best media servers out there, built it ourselves from scratch. Media Soup is not the most, it's an open source media server, and we've built on top of that, added our own code base completely and made sure that it works flawlessly. But yes, as we reach millions of scale, we require to have more protocol engineers to come into it and to make sure that things are running smoothly, and the ball game completely changes in terms of load balancing once you're not using hyperscalers, but you're using these node operators, because now you need to make sure that how much amount of load can you give to essentially a edge based device as compared to a hyperscaler which can just handle in a very elastic fashion things. So
Yeah, that's tough, and you have to make sure those are reliable, and there has to be failover if they're not, and number of issues, obviously.
absolutely. And the good thing is that what we realize is that this network which we have built, this assets which we have right now, this is not only good for communication now, because you have the whole bandwidth on your plate. So we also think about cash flow beyond just communication. Communication, I call that as an impact market, which is a market where it creates good impact. But it is very helpful for even money markets. For example, a high frequency trader, or if you go to New York, you'll see that every bank has their basement is completely filled with data centers, and they have this optic fiber cable lines, making sure that they have the fastest way to win any kind of do any kind of order book mapping, or just have that the fastest execution of the trade in general. So the if you there's a book on that as well by Michael Lewis, which talks about that the fastest the fastest trade wins in general. So if you are able to make sure that Flash Boys and Flash Boys 2.0 is now also here. Yeah, so Flash Boys, exactly. So Flash Boys all talks about data like having fiber optic cable line, making it the fastest and stuff like that. You can use the Flash Boys concept in the world of what we had built as well, by making sure, because now you have nodes at the edges, it can really make sure that trades get executed faster. You can make things faster in the financial world as well. That's something which we're exploring very deeply, because we believe that that could also lead to solving a good amount of cash flow for the node operators as well, and then funneling that money towards the impact market, which is the communication market, and making it bigger and bigger.
Interesting. That's terrific vision for sure. Help people who want to sign up as a customer. Where do they go? Presumably you have a wait list or notification for when the next node sale is. How do people find this and be part of join the community?
Yeah, absolutely. So Huddle01.com, HUDDLE 01, in numerics.com. That's the way you can reach. You will be able to find whatever you want to do as a consumer. If you love privacy-centric apps, if you want to look better, if you're a creator, it's very easy to use the app Huddle01.meet. It's on iOS store, it's on Play Store. It already has around 20,000 downloads so far, and you can use that on your phone. You can use that on Google Calendar. You can use that on your Calendly, on your cal.com. If you're a developer, you can go on to the same. You'll find the SDKs. You can use that. It's open source. You can use that to build your own awesome apps. If you're a node operator, you'll find Huddle01.network, again in the Huddle01.com page, where you can just sign up, and you can know about when the next phase of nodes is coming. You can know about the specs. You can know about how you can run the nodes on a Raspberry Pi, or on a laptop, or on a VPS. So it's for everyone who essentially wants to be part of the network in any way possible.
Fantastic. Listen, thrilled about this success of what you guys are building, thrilled about the real world application, and really thrilled that it is such a low bar for any company to join DePIN and to benefit from the DePIN ecosystem, DePIN token economics, and DePIN infrastructure. So that is really exciting. So look forward to hearing more about the success. And as soon as you close Zoom, you're right back on here to tell us all about it. How's that?
Absolutely. Well, I'll come maybe in a year, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
We'll be here.
Touch wood. Yeah.
Awesome. Listen, thanks for coming, Ayush.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Tom.
The DePIN Podcast, the place where we explore real-world use cases unlocked by crypto. That's all for today. Thanks for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us grow. Add a like, add a comment. And of course, if you have anyone you think we should be talking to or have on this podcast, either leave a comment there or reach out. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.